It's the Side Quest Podcast.
Imagine you've just invested your life savings into this massive, historic blue chip company.
Right. High stakes.
Exactly. So you go to the annual shareholder meeting and the board of directors introduces the new CEO. And they hand this person a sweeping mandate, right? Like a 5-year turnaround plan, absolute authority to run the business. And you feel great about it.
You think your money is safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then 6 months later, the quarterly earnings dip just slightly. And suddenly, without consulting you or, any other shareholder, the board holds a secret meeting, fires the CEO, and just installs a new one.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
Then a year later, a PR scandal hits. The board panics again, fires the second CEO, and promotes a third.
Just endless churn.
Right. By year 3, you're looking at a company that's had 4 different chief executives. The stock is insanely volatile, and you, the shareholder, haven't had a single vote on any of it since that first meeting.
You'd be furious. I mean, you'd lose complete faith in the whole corporate structure.
Completely.
Yeah.
You would just assume the board isn't actually trying to fix the company. They're just, firing the CEO to protect their own lucrative board seats from angry investors.
Honestly, that paints a remarkably accurate picture of the psychology at play here.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the focus shifts entirely from, long-term strategy to immediate survival. When the board is terrified of the shareholders, the CEO just becomes entirely disposable.
And that corporate panic spiral is really the perfect lens for looking at what is happening in the United Kingdom today.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, for a century, the Westminster model was viewed as the absolute gold standard of stable parliamentary democracy. It was the blueprint.
Right. The system everyone else tried to copy.
Exactly. But we were recording this on June 23, 2026. And yesterday, Keir Starmer walked out of 10 Downing Street and resigned as Prime Minister and leader of the Labour Party.
Which is it's stunning.
It is. This is a man who, less than 2 years ago, won a historic 174-seat landslide victory.
The speed of that collapse it's really difficult to overstate. It's a complete systemic shock.
So, today we are diving deep into the source material. We've got breaking news coverage in the BBC regarding Starmer's exit, and this really comprehensive analytical report called Britain's Revolving Door.
It's a great report. Really gets into the mechanics of it.
It does. And our mission today is to answer one massive question based on those sources.
Yeah.
Why is the United Kingdom about to install its 7th Prime Minister in roughly 10 years?
7th. It's wild when you say it out loud.
It really is. Why is the turnover rate for this incredibly powerful office suddenly so high that, seeing out a full term has just become a political impossibility?
Right.
So whether you follow every twist of global politics or you're an observer of international markets just trying to make sense of the British economy, this deep dive is going to map out exactly how a generational office morphed into a temp agency.
It's a temp agency, yeah. That's exactly what it feels like.
Right. We're going to explore the structural rot, the uncodified rules, and what this permanent instability means for the future of the country. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to understand how extreme this current turnover rate is, we first have to look at what normal used to be, right?
Yeah, lay the baseline for us.
So, the modern velocity of British politics has completely warped our perception of political time. If you look at the titans of post-war British governance, you see genuine longevity.
Like who?
Like Winston Churchill.
Yeah.
He spent 9 years in Downing Street across his 2 terms.
Wow, 9 years.
Right. And Margaret Thatcher governed for almost 12 uninterrupted years. Tony Blair was in power for a full decade.
So a decade was kind of the standard expectation.
Exactly. The assumption was always that a prime minister required and generally received a massive runway to implement their vision.
So won the election, you got the keys to number 10, and you actually unpacked your bags. You stayed long enough to build a legacy, for better or worse.
But in the exact same span of time it took just one of those historical figures to complete their tenure, modern Britain has burned through an entire bookshelf of leaders.
That's crazy.
Since 2016, the sequence has been David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, Keir Starmer, and now we are on the brink of a 7th.
That is just...
We are looking at a system that chews up prime ministers at a rate of roughly 1 every 18 to 24 months.
Let's look at the timeline of that domino effect, because the context of how each leader fell actually reveals, the mechanics of the machine that destroyed them.
Oh, absolutely.
And the initiating spark for this entire era of chaos is David Cameron, right?
Yes. Cameron is really the architect of the modern baseline. He led a coalition government starting in 2010 and then secured a clear conservative majority in 2015.
Which feels like ancient history now.
By today's standards, those 6 years look like an era of profound tranquility. But Cameron was actually managing this intense internal insurgency.
Oh, right, the Eurosceptics.
Yeah, exactly. The Conservative Party has always had a vocal Eurosceptic wing, and by 2015 they were really gaining momentum, fueled externally by the rise of Nigel Farage and the UK Independence Party.
And they were threatening to peel away Conservative voters, right?
Right. So Cameron essentially tried to call their bluff. He promised a national referendum on whether the UK should remain in the European Union.
He thought he had it in the bag.
He completely assumed he would win a decisive Remain victory, silence the Eurosceptic wing of his party, neutralize Farage, and just settle the European question for a generation.
Wow. Talk about a massive miscalculation of the national mood.
It was monumental. On June 23, 2016, which is exactly 10 years ago today, by the way,
Right, the anniversary.
the British public voted by a narrow margin to leave the EU. And the morning the results were clear, Cameron stood outside Downing Street and resigned.
Because he couldn't, he staked everything on staying.
Exactly. He had staked his entire political authority on remaining in the EU. When the voters rejected his core argument, his position just became instantly untenable.
Which handed the keys to Theresa May. And she stepped into a situation with an impossible Venn diagram, didn't she?
A total nightmare.
Because, as the source material points out, Brexit wasn't a piece of legislation. It was an abstract concept. It meant very different things to different factions.
Right. Theresa May inherited a mandate to leave the EU without any consensus on how to do it.
Which sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. She spent 3 agonizing years, from 2016 to 2019, trying to negotiate a withdrawal agreement with Brussels, only to bring it back to Westminster and watch it get shredded by her own party.
And they just kept voting it down, right?
Parliament rejected her proposed deal 3 separate times. The pro-European MPs hated it because it took them out of the EU, and the hardline Brexit MPs in her own party hated it because they felt it kept Britain too closely aligned with European regulations.
So she was just trapped in the middle.
Completely trapped.
Yeah.
She even survived a formal confidence vote from her own MPs in late 2018, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The political capital was just gone.
She couldn't actually pass any laws.
Exactly. She ultimately resigned in tears in May 2019, having been ground down by the sheer parliamentary gridlock.
And that gridlock paved the way for a completely different kind of politician, right?
Yeah.
Boris Johnson.
Yes. Johnson recognized that the country was exhausted by the procedural nightmare of Theresa May's tenure, so he ran a brilliantly simple, singular campaign in the December 2019 election.
Get Brexit done.
Yeah, Brexit done, exactly. And he won a colossal 80-seat majority.
Which is huge, right?
That is a commanding number in the House of Commons. Historically, an 80-seat majority grants a prime minister a decade of uninterrupted power.
Wow.
He officially took the UK out of the EU and then immediately had to pivot to managing the COVID-19 pandemic.
But his downfall wasn't about a failure to pass legislation like May or losing a referendum like Cameron. It was something else entirely.
It was a failure of the social contract.
Right. The analysis highlights Partygate as the fatal blow.
Mm-hmm.
Because while the entire nation was under strict, legally enforced lockdown, meaning, people couldn't attend the funerals of their own parents, Downing Street staff and Johnson himself were holding social gatherings.
And when the public found out, the anger was just visceral.
I can imagine.
The ethical scandals just accumulated so rapidly. Partygate was compounded by questions over how his Downing Street apartment refurbishments were funded and his disastrous handling of misconduct allegations against a deputy chief whip.
So it was just scandal after scandal.
Exactly. And the tipping point arrived in July 2022. It wasn't the opposition party that removed him. His own government simply collapsed from within.
Wait, how does that work?
Dozens of his own cabinet ministers and junior officials resigned en masse over the course of 48 hours. They just refused to serve under his leadership anymore.
Wow. So they forced his hand.
Left with a government that literally could not function, he was forced to step down.
Which clears the stage for the most intense, compressed political disaster in modern British history. Liz Truss.
Oh, Liz Truss.
49 days in the autumn of 2022. It's almost hard to wrap your head around a tenure that short.
It really is.
I mean, the tabloid joke of her being outlasted by a head of lettuce is funny. But The underlying mechanics of her exit are terrifying
Absolutely.
because she bypassed all the normal political checks and balances and got dismantled directly by the global financial system.
Her downfall is a fascinating case study in pure economic causality.
How so?
Well, Truss won the internal party leadership contest by promising radical economic growth through sweeping unfunded tax cuts.
Unfunded being the key word there.
Right. When she and her chancellor announced this mini budget in September 2022, they actively bypassed the Office for Budget Responsibility.
Which means what exactly?
It means they effectively hid the long-term costs of these cuts from the public. But, you cannot hide the math from the bond market.
Right. Let's break that mechanism down because I think it's crucial. When a government announces massive tax cuts without reducing spending, it has to borrow billions of pounds to make up the difference, right? And they do that by issuing government bonds. But the market looked at Truss's plan, decided the UK government was suddenly a much riskier investment, and demanded massive interest yields to buy that debt.
The sell-off of British government bonds was so sudden and so violent that it actually triggered a collateral crisis in the pension sector.
Wait, the pension sector? How are they connected?
So, liability-driven investment funds, which pension schemes use to manage risk, were suddenly facing margin calls they just couldn't meet.
Oh, wow.
The Bank of England had to stage an emergency multi-billion-pound intervention, literally just to stop the nation's pension funds from becoming insolvent in a matter of hours.
In hours? That is terrifying.
The mortgage market spiked, the pound cratered against the dollar, and the Conservative Party instantly realized she had to be removed before she caused a sovereign debt crisis.
So Truss resigns, and the party installs Rishi Sunak to act as like the adult in the room, right?
Yeah.
To stabilize the markets and basically try to clean up the wreckage.
Yes, that was the idea.
And Sunak governs for about 2 years, managing incredibly high inflation and a cost of living crisis. But looking at the electoral data from our sources, the damage to the Conservative brand was permanent at that point.
It really was.
By the time Sunak called a general election in July 2024, the public was just waiting with baseball bats.
The fatigue was absolute. The Conservative Party had been in power for 14 years. They'd overseen multiple internal coups, and they literally crashed the bond market.
Yeah, that's a tough record to defend.
The voters handed them a devastating defeat. And this is a vital distinction in our timeline, something we really need to highlight.
What's that?
Of the 6 prime ministers we've discussed from 2010 to 2024, Rishi Sunak is the only one who left office because the public explicitly voted his party out in a general election.
The only one. Every other transition of power happened behind the closed doors of Westminster.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the man who just left the stage yesterday, Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer.
He leads the Labour Party out of the wilderness, wins a 174-seat majority in 2024, and promises a return to boring, stable, competent governance. Like, he was supposed to be the antidote to the Conservative chaos.
He was framed as the great stabilizer.
Yet, here we are in June 2026, less than 2 years later, and his tenure is over.
The speed with which his political capital evaporated is the ultimate proof that the turnover issue transcends party lines.
It's not just a Conservative problem.
No, not at all. By late 2025, his net approval ratings were severely underwater. The Ipsos polling highlighted in the source material showed him as the least popular prime minister since their records began in the late 1970s.
That is brutal.
And then the Labour Party suffered heavy, demoralizing losses in the May 2026 local elections.
And the analysis points to a cascading series of misjudgments that broke the trust of his own MPs, right?
It was a very rapid unraveling.
The most glaring, according to the report, was his decision to appoint Lord Mandelson as the UK ambassador to the United States. Now, Mandelson is a very controversial legacy figure from the Blair era. And shortly after his appointment, new details emerged regarding the depth of his past associations with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Right. It was an explosive revelation.
And Starmer was forced to sack him almost immediately. For a prime minister who built his entire brand on being this rigorous former chief prosecutor with impeccable ethical standards, it was a catastrophic, unforced error.
That scandal really acted as an accelerant. It completely emboldened his internal critics.
They smelled blood.
You had his defense secretary, John Healey, resigning over intense disagreements regarding military spending. You had factions within the Labour Party openly criticizing the Treasury's economic stagnation and the government's handling of immigration.
And Starmer tried to fight back initially, didn't he?
He did. He tried to stare them down, challenging his critics to mount a formal leadership contest. But as the sheer volume of dissent grew, he realized that parliamentary arithmetic was turning against him.
So he jumped before he was pushed.
Exactly. He opted to resign gracefully, walking out to Beethoven's Ode to Joy, rather than endure a brutal public defenestration by his own MPs.
Okay, I have to stop right here and challenge the premise of everything we just discussed.
Go for it.
Because I'm looking at this timeline, and there's a massive glaring disconnect. We keep talking about prime ministers being forced out or realizing the arithmetic was against them.
Right.
But in a democracy, the voters are the shareholders. How on earth does a prime minister sitting on a 174-seat majority or an 80-seat majority in Johnson's case get fired without a single citizen casting a ballot?
It's a great question.
Why isn't there a constitutional safeguard protecting the elected leader?
That confusion is incredibly common, particularly for observers accustomed to presidential systems like the United States.
Right, where you have a set term.
Right. And to unravel it, we have to look closely at the mechanical reality of the United Kingdom's uncodified constitution.
Uncodified, meaning it's not all written down in one single document.
Exactly. In the UK, the public never actually casts a ballot for the prime minister.
There is no national ticket.
No.
Like, the name Keir Starmer or Boris Johnson isn't at the top of the ballot paper when a voter goes to the polls.
Precisely. The UK system is strictly parliamentary. You, as a voter, only elect your local member of parliament, your MP.
Okay.
There are 650 of these MPs across the country. The role of prime minister is granted by convention to whoever happens to be the leader of the political party that can command a majority of those 650 seats in the House of Commons.
It's all about controlling the House.
That is the only mandate the prime minister actually holds, the ongoing confidence of their fellow MPs.
It's back to our boardroom metaphor.
Yeah.
The voters elect the board of directors, the MPs. The board of directors chooses the CEO.
Exactly.
Which means the board of directors can fire the CEO whenever they want without asking the shareholders.
Yeah.
But what is the actual mechanism for that?
Right. How do they actually do it?
Yeah. If I'm a disgruntled backbench MP and I want the prime minister gone, what do I actually physically do?
Well, it depends on the party, because
Right.
these mechanisms aren't national laws. They are internal party rules.
Ah, okay.
Let's look at the Conservative Party's mechanism first, the famous 1922 committee.
I've heard of that.
Right. So this is an organized group of all the conservative backbenchers, basically, the MPs, who do not hold ministerial roles in the government.
And what's not on the payroll?
Exactly. If an MP loses faith in the leader, they can write a formal physical letter of no confidence and hand it to the chair of the 1922 committee.
And it's highly secretive, right? The chair doesn't publicly announce who sent the letters.
It is entirely confidential. The chair just locks these letters in a safe.
Literally a safe.
Literally. And the rule is that if a certain percentage of the parliamentary party, historically it has been 15%, submits these letters, it triggers an automatic secret ballot leadership vote among all conservative MPs.
So the prime minister suddenly has to win a majority in that secret ballot just to keep their job.
Yes. And even the threat of hitting that 15% threshold is usually enough to terrify a prime minister, because once the vote is called, the blood is in the water.
And the Labour Party has a similar trigger mechanism.
They do, though the threshold sits at 20% of their MPs backing a challenger. In Starmer's case, he saw the backroom organizing.
He saw the writing on the wall.
He knew the letters, or the Labour equivalent of them, were accumulating. He knew his cabinet ministers were calculating their own odds, so he preempted the formal challenge to spare the party the spectacle.
What's fascinating here is the utter lack of institutional friction.
What's fascinating here is exactly that. In a presidential system, removing a sitting leader requires the extraordinarily high constitutional bar of impeachment, which involves high crimes and misdemeanors, trials, supermajorities.
It takes months, sometimes years.
In the UK, removing a prime minister just requires a few dozen panicked MPs submitting letters because they had a bad week in the local press.
That is wild. And the analysis points out another crucial development that compounds this instability: the repeal of the Fixed-Term Parliaments Act.
Yes, that's a huge piece of the puzzle. From From 2011 to 2022, the UK operated under a law that essentially locked Parliament in for a 5-year term unless a two-thirds supermajority voted for an early election.
It tried to force some stability?
Right. But the Conservative government repealed that act, returning to the traditional uncodified system.
So what does that mean in practice?
Now, the Prime Minister holds the unilateral power to request the dissolution of Parliament and call a general election at almost any time within a 5-year window.
Which creates a fascinating dynamic for whoever takes over next.
Very much so.
When the Labour Party installs a new leader to replace Starmer, that new Prime Minister has the power to immediately call a snap election to try and win a fresh mandate from the public.
Yeah.
Or they can try to ride out the remainder of Starmer's 5-year term. It's entirely up to them.
The irony of this entire uncodified structure is that it was designed to be a profound strength.
Awesome.
The flexibility of the Westminster system was supposed to allow the government to absorb shocks without plunging the state into a constitutional crisis. If a prime minister suddenly fell ill, the party could seamlessly install a successor in a matter of days.
Right, without shutting down the government.
But the exact same flexibility that prevents institutional gridlock means there are absolutely zero shock absorbers. When political norms erode and MPs become hyper-reactive, the system transforms into a revolving door.
That answers the how. The mechanics of the 1922 committee and the internal party rules explain how a prime minister can be removed over a weekend.
Right.
But it doesn't explain the why. Why have British MPs suddenly become so trigger-happy? I mean, the rules haven't dramatically changed, but the behavior of the politicians certainly has.
The anxiety levels are off the charts.
Exactly. So to understand the underlying anxiety driving this boardroom panic, we have to look at the massive economic and social drivers identified in the report.
And looking purely at the electoral data and the timeline of events, the initiating shock to the system is undeniably the 2016 Brexit referendum.
Okay, and before we dive into that, I need to be clear. As we unpack the impact of Brexit and the subsequent rise of various political factions, we are looking at this strictly through the lens of electoral mechanics, okay?
Very important distinction.
Right. Our goal isn't to validate the leave or remain arguments or endorse any viewpoints from the right or the left. We are strictly reporting the analysis from the source material to explain how the event itself broke the traditional machinery of the major parties.
So the referendum acted as a massive wedge. But crucially, it was a wedge within the parties, not just between them.
That's a great point.
Historically, British politics was broadly divided along class and economic lines. Labour was the party of the working class and trade unions. Conservatives were the party of capital, business, and rural traditionalists.
A pretty standard left-right divide.
Right. But Brexit shattered that alignment. You had wealthy, pro-business conservatives who were desperate to remain in the EU's single market, sitting on the exact same backbenches as populist, hardline, Eurosceptic conservatives.
And they had to govern together.
Exactly. And on the Labour side, you had metropolitan, pro-European progressive MPs trying to hold together a coalition with working-class pro-leave voters in the industrial North who felt completely left behind by globalization.
So the parties essentially became broad churches with congregations that actively despised each other.
When a party is that internally fractured, the prime minister has no solid foundation. Every single policy decision alienates a massive faction of their own MPs.
It's unmanageable.
But the analysts in our source material are very careful to point out that Brexit is only a symptom of a much deeper disease.
It was the trigger, but not the gun.
Right. Brexit rearranged the political map, but it didn't create the underlying anger. To find the source of the public rage that is terrifying these MPs, we have to look at the bank accounts of the British public.
Which means, going back to the 2008 financial crisis,
Yes.
the report refers to the aftermath of 2008 as a lost decade of growth. But sitting here in 2026, it's closer to 2 lost decades.
Nearly 20 years of stagnation.
And there is one specific statistic in the data that just stopped me in my tracks. It is the defining metric of this entire era.
Which one?
For much of the British workforce, real wages, meaning your pay adjusted for the cost of living and inflation, have barely grown in almost 20 years.
That is an astonishing economic reality.
It's hard to even process.
Outside of the immediate aftermath of major global conflicts, it is essentially unprecedented in modern British history. We are talking about an entire generation of workers who have never experienced the feeling of their paycheck stretching further at the end of the month.
Let's dwell on that for a second, because it is the engine of all this political instability. If you are a family living in the Midlands, right, And you've worked hard for 2 decades, but you still can't afford a better standard of living. You can't get a timely appointment with the National Health Service, and your local high street is boarded up.
You are going to be furious.
You're going to be absolutely furious. And you are going to direct that fury at whoever happens to be standing at the dispatch box in the House of Commons.
And that anger is entirely rational. The Vote Leave campaign in 2016 capitalized on that exact frustration.
Right, they promised to fix.
The promise was that leaving the European Union would cure these economic grievances, that it would allow the UK to control its borders, deregulate its economy, and divert billions of pounds back into the NHS.
But the reality of untangling the UK from its largest trading partner proved incredibly complex and economically damaging in the short to medium term. The report describes it as a fiscal hangover.
The act of leaving actually weakened the public finances, compounding the stagnation that began in 2008.
And then you add the pandemic.
Right. Add in the massive debt accrued during the COVID-19 pandemic and the energy price shocks triggered by the war in Ukraine.
It's just blow after blow.
Successive prime ministers found themselves trapped in a fiscal straitjacket. They simply lacked the money to fund the visible, tangible improvements like fixing potholes, building affordable housing, or cutting NHS waiting lists that would actually calm the public's anger.
It's back to our corporate metaphor. The CEO is brought in to turn the company around, but they have absolutely no capital to invest in new products.
Nothing to work with.
The shareholders are screaming for dividends, the board is panicking, and the CEO is just rearranging the furniture until they get fired.
That's exactly what it is.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because the structural rot turns into a mathematical crisis. The UK electoral system is actively distorting this public anger, creating majorities that look completely dominant on paper, but are actually incredibly fragile in reality.
This brings us to the collapse of the two-party duopoly and the mechanics of the first-past-the-post voting system.
Let's get into the numbers.
For generations, the Conservative and Labour parties completely dominated the electoral landscape. In 2019, those two traditional parties captured roughly 76% of the total popular vote.
So 3/4 of the country.
Just 5 years later, in the 2024 election that brought Keir Starmer to power, their combined share of the vote plummeted to 58%.
That is a massive drop. Voters are abandoning the mainstream in droves.
Yes.
But the way those votes are counted in the UK creates a massive illusion of stability. Let's break down first past the post for anyone unfamiliar.
Okay.
In this system, whoever gets the highest number of votes in a specific local constituency wins the seat. It doesn't matter if they get 51% of the vote or 35% of the vote.
Right, there's no runoff.
Right. As long as they have one more vote than the second-place candidate, they take all the power for that district.
Exactly. The system traditionally rewards broad national parties and severely penalizes smaller parties whose support is spread too thinly across the country.
Which kept the big two in power.
But when public support fragments in multiple directions, first past the post begins to manufacture what the analysts call artificial, brittle majorities.
Keir Starmer's 2024 victory is the perfect example of this. Labour won an absolutely massive 174-seat majority in the House of Commons. That implies total dominance.
It looks like a landslide.
But they achieved that historic seat count with only 33.7% of the popular vote.
Let that sink in. Nearly 66% of the voting public chose someone other than the Labour Party, yet Labour was awarded absolute control of the legislative agenda.
It's mathematically wild.
On a spreadsheet, a 174-seat majority looks like an impenetrable fortress. But the MPs who make up that majority know the truth.
They know how close it was.
They look at their own local election results and realize they only won their seat because the opposition vote was split among 3 other candidates.
Yeah.
They know their margin of victory is paper thin.
They know they are standing on a trapdoor, and the entity holding the lever to that trapdoor is Reform UK.
The rise of Reform UK is the most disruptive electoral force in modern British politics.
Who are they, for those who don't follow UK politics closely?
Led by Nigel Farage, Reform has positioned itself to the right of the Conservative Party, running on a platform of drastically reducing immigration and pushing back against what they view as out-of-touch Westminster elites.
But looking at the polling data, Reform isn't just taking votes from traditional Conservatives, are they? Like, they are acting as a wrecking ball across the entire political spectrum.
That is the crucial dynamic. Reform is successfully drawing working-class voters away from both traditional Conservative and traditional Labour bases.
Wow. From Labour to...
Yes, they're tapping into that deep 20-year economic frustration we discussed earlier. In a first-past-the-post system, if Reform UK manages to siphon off just 5 or 6% of the vote in a given district, it can completely flip a seat that has been considered a safe Labour or Conservative stronghold for decades.
And that 5% swing is what generates the terror.
The absolute panic.
Right. Because if you are a backbench MP and you see your party's national polling dip by a few points, you aren't thinking about the Prime Minister's long-term legacy.
Yeah.
You are thinking about your mortgage.
You're thinking about losing your job.
You are terrified that Reform UK is going to eat your margin of error in the next election. So what do? You submit a letter to the 1922 committee, you hit the panic button, and try to swap out the CEO before the shareholders fire you.
The structural anxiety is pervasive, and it proves that this isn't just an issue of one party losing its way.
Right, it's everyone.
The Conservatives had an 80-seat majority under Johnson and imploded in 3 years. Labour had a 174-seat majority under Starmer and imploded in under 2 years.
The exact same pattern.
You have a right-leaning, Brexit-focused coalition and a centrist, restoration-focused coalition suffering the exact same structural failure mode.
It is the definition of a systemic crisis. But, okay, I want to push back on this structural argument just a bit. Because if we solely blame the uncodified rules, the stagnant economy, and the voting system, we completely absolve the actual humans making the decisions.
Fair point.
We can't sit here and pretend that Liz Truss blowing up the bond market was an inevitable consequence of first past the post. She actively chose to ignore the economic guardrails.
She did.
Boris Johnson actively chose to host parties during a lockdown. Keir Starmer actively chose to appoint a highly controversial figure to a crucial diplomatic post.
Doesn't personal hubris play a massive role here?
It absolutely does, and the source material is very clear that personal agency cannot be ignored.
Okay.
The structural environment lowers the bar for removal. It makes the ice incredibly thin, but individual prime ministers are still the ones choosing to jump up and down on it.
Great way to put it.
Truss's mini-budget was a self-inflicted ideological experiment. Johnson's scandals were a profound failure of personal ethics and political management. Starmer's missteps demonstrated a surprising lack of political radar for a leader who had so methodically rebuilt his party. And their missteps are instantly amplified by the modern media environment.
Yeah.
Like, we have to factor in the culture of Westminster today compared to 30 years ago.
Oh, the speed of information.
We live in an algorithmic, hyper-accelerated media ecosystem.
The analysis emphasizes how highly online modern British MPs are. They are constantly monitoring social media sentiment, WhatsApp group chats, and real-time local polling.
They're glued to their phones.
In the eras of Thatcher or Blair, parliamentary culture was more insulated. If a prime minister had a disastrous news cycle, the party leadership would tell the backbenchers to hold the line, and they would ride it out for months.
You could weather the storm.
Today, a single leaked memo or a poorly received press conference can dominate the digital algorithm for 48 hours and crystallize a backbench panic that becomes completely unstoppable before the weekend is over.
It's a completely reactive mindset. The MPs are essentially governing by Twitter trends and focus groups.
Exactly.
Which brings us to a really uncomfortable conclusion for the UK. If the environment is this toxic, and the timeline for success is this compressed, is the role of Prime Minister fundamentally broken?
That's the big question.
Are we just suffering through a drought of capable politicians, or does the machine itself destroy anyone who sits in the chair?
The evidence points overwhelmingly to the machine.
Really? You don't think it's a talent issue?
No, look at the resumes of the people we are discussing. David Cameron was a highly polished, internationally respected leader. Theresa May was one of the longest-serving and most disciplined Home Secretaries in modern history.
True.
Rishi Sunak was a highly educated, competent technocrat. Keir Starmer was a former director of public prosecutions who systematically rooted out his party's more extreme factions to win a historic landslide.
They had serious credentials.
By conventional historical metrics, these were serious, credentialed politicians.
They weren't amateurs. They were capable managers who were just fed into a wood chipper.
Yes. What they all shared was an inability to survive the incredibly compressed timeline that modern British politics imposes between winning a mandate and losing your own party's patience.
Which is like, what, 18 months now?
Exactly. And this creates a dangerous secondary effect. It changes the caliber of people who want the job in the future.
Well, that makes sense.
If you are an ambitious, visionary leader and you know the realistic shelf life of a prime minister is now 18 to 24 months, your entire calculus changes.
You become entirely risk-averse.
You have to.
Because if you know you might get fired next year, you aren't going to launch a 10-year infrastructure project or a massive overhaul of the tax code. You are just going to try and survive the next news cycle. The incentive to build long-term institutions completely vanishes.
The report explicitly outlines 5 interconnected reasons why the era of the generational prime minister leaders who define a decade is effectively over.
Let's run through those 5 factors.
Okay, let's look at how these factors interlock. The first is the collapse of the mandate to mutiny window.
Mandate to mutiny window. I like that.
Because party discipline has eroded, an MP feels comfortable threatening a leadership challenge within months of a general election. The taboo of regicide is just gone.
They don't even hesitate anymore. The second factor is the fracturing of the voting blocs, right?
Yes.
You pointed out earlier that Thatcher and Blair relied on stable, class-based, two-party coalitions. Those are dead. Today, any single-party majority is just a temporary coalition of convenience pieced together from 5 or 6 competing demographics.
And the moment the economy dips, that coalition shatters.
Exactly, which ties directly into the third factor, the complete lack of fiscal room to maneuver. As we discussed, a stagnant economy and high debt mean a prime minister cannot buy time by distributing economic dividends to angry voters.
There's no money to smooth things over.
Factor 4 is the reactive nature of the job itself. A modern prime minister's bandwidth is almost entirely consumed by overlapping permanent crises.
Supply chain shocks, energy spikes.
Global conflicts, endless NHS winter crises. There is zero intellectual space left for long-horizon strategic planning.
And the fifth factor is perhaps the most cynical of all.
Let's hear it.
Because the uncodified constitution allows a party to swap leaders without calling a general election, political parties now view leadership changes as a low-cost reset button.
A magic eraser.
Exactly. When public polling dips, MPs don't do the hard work of defending their record or fixing the underlying policy failure. They simply present a fresh face to the public and ask for a blank slate.
They have weaponized the revolving door to avoid electoral accountability.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the comparison the analysts draw in the source material is fascinating.
What do they compare it to?
Historically, when political scientists talked about the revolving door of leadership, they were talking about Italy.
Oh, right. Italy is famous for its post-war instability, constantly churning through coalition governments.
But there is a massive constitutional distinction between Rome and London, isn't there?
An absolutely vital distinction. Italy's parliamentary system, with its pure proportional representation, is expressly designed for multi-party coalitions.
Right. Instability and constant negotiation are essentially built into the constitutional source code to prevent the consolidation of power.
Britain's system is the exact opposite. First past the post is explicitly designed to produce strong, stable, single-party majority governments.
So when a system designed to produce absolute stability instead produces an Italian-style revolving door, it's a symptom of catastrophic failure.
It's working completely against its own design.
The fact that Keir Starmer's government, armed with a 174-seat majority, collapsed internally in under 2 years is the ultimate red flag. It proves that public trust is evaporating faster than any structural buffer can absorb it.
The parliamentary math simply doesn't matter anymore. A 100-seat majority provides no more protection than a 10-seat majority if the underlying economic indicators aren't moving fast enough to outrun the panic of your own backbenchers.
It's all about momentum, not math.
Which brings us to the immediate reality of right now. Keir Starmer has resigned. Labour's National Executive Committee has set out a rapid timetable. Nominations open in early July, and a new leader will be in place before Parliament returns from its summer recess in September.
Very fast process.
And looking at the political landscape, one name is completely dominating the conversation: Andy Burnham.
Andy Burnham is heavily favored to become the 7th prime minister of this era.
What's his background? Why him?
His positioning is fascinating because he represents a deliberate pivot away from the typical Westminster insider. Burnham served as an MP from 2001 to 2017, holding cabinet positions under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown.
So he has experience.
But his real political capital comes from his time outside the London bubble. He left Parliament to become the mayor of Greater Manchester.
He cultivated a brand as the King of the North. Right?
Yeah. Yes. He pushed back against the central government during COVID lockdowns. He's credited with bringing visible economic investment to post-industrial areas. And he speaks with a regional accent that resonates with the exact working-class voters. Labour has been bleeding to reform UK.
Which is huge for them right now.
Just last week, Burnham secured an emphatic victory in the Makerfield by-election, comfortably defeating a strong challenge from a Reform UK candidate.
Oh, so he actually beat Reform head-to-head.
That single data point resonated massively through the Labour Party. Political commentators and panicked MPs are suddenly looking at Burnham as the only figure with the specific political touch required to neutralize Nigel Farage in the traditional Labour heartlands.
And the internal party machinery is already clearing the path for him, aren't they?
It's moving incredibly fast.
Former Health Secretary Wes Streeting, who was widely considered a frontrunner for the leadership, has already publicly stepped aside and offered Burnham his full backing. Streeting stated that Burnham is committed to an inclusive party and, most importantly, can win the fight against nationalism. It's essentially a coronation.
It is a deeply revealing moment for Labour.
What do you say that?
By coalescing around Burnham so quickly, the party is implicitly admitting that its existing pool of senior cabinet talent in Westminster simply wasn't electorally credible enough to survive the populist threat from reform.
They didn't trust their own bench.
They had to reach outside the building and engineer a route for a popular regional mayor to take the helm.
The reactions from the broader political spectrum perfectly capture the immense, contradictory pressures Burnham is about to face.
Oh, everyone is weighing in.
You have Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative leader, attacking Starmer's legacy, calling him a terrible prime minister, but insisting that Labour's fundamental values are the problem, regardless of who sits in the chair.
Standard opposition line.
Then you have Ed Davey, the Liberal Democrat leader, tapping into the profound exhaustion of the voters, saying people are sick of being let down by an endless merry-go-round of prime ministers while nothing really changes.
Which is a very potent message right now.
And perhaps most significantly, you have voices from the left, like Zach Polanski from the Green Party, challenging Burnham's policy agenda before he even takes office.
He's not getting a free pass from anyone.
Polanski is demanding to know if Burnham will implement wealth taxes and, crucially, if he will support proportional representation.
That PR question is going to keep coming up.
Meanwhile, Nigel Farage is dominating the airways, demanding an immediate general election, arguing that Labour has no democratic mandate for a third prime minister without going back to the public.
And Burnham is already trying to manage those expectations.
What's he saying?
When he arrived at Euston Station in London yesterday, reporters swarmed him, asking if he would yield to Farage and call a snap election.
Did he answer?
He deflected. He said his only priority was navigating the procedural steps of being sworn back in as an MP.
But he can't deflect forever. He is stepping into the exact same pressure cooker that broke his 6 predecessors.
He is.
So, taking all this analysis into account, what does the future actually look like? The report lays out 3 plausible scenarios for the next 5 years of British politics. Let's debate them.
Scenario 1 is the optimistic path. Burnham actually stabilizes the ship.
The dream scenario.
He leverages his honeymoon period, unites the party, and serves out a fuller term, potentially reaching the scheduled 2029 election without calling an early vote.
But for that to happen, the external environment has to cooperate in a way it hasn't in over a decade.
A lot of things have to go right.
Economic growth has to tangibly accelerate.
Sure.
People need to feel their wages stretching further. NHS waiting lists have to visibly shrink so voters feel like the state is functioning again.
And crucially, Reform UK's polling numbers have to plateau.
Right. If the economic anxiety drops, the electoral terror among backbench MPs subsides, and Burnham survives.
It's a plausible scenario on paper. But as the report notes, it fights the absolute base rate of recent history.
It's hoping for a miracle.
It requires an alignment of positive economic forces that hasn't existed since David Cameron's early years. This leads us directly to Scenario 2, which we must consider the most statistically likely outcome.
Accelerated collapse.
Yes.
Scenario 2 is just the loop repeating itself.
Yeah.
Burnham gets the job, but the structural economic rot remains. Inflation ticks back up, or public services fail to improve quickly enough.
Reform UK continues to climb in the polls, and Farage's demands for an election become deafening.
The Labour backbenchers look at the math, realize they're going to lose their seats, and the exact same panic that destroyed Keir Starmer repeats itself with a different face at the podium. Burnham faces a mutiny before his term ends.
It is the trap of the uncodified system. Unless the underlying incentives for MPs change, their behavior will not change.
Which brings us to the final, most radical possibility outlined in the analysis.
Scenario 3 is the wild card. A genuine constitutional paradigm shift leading to electoral reform.
The ultimate breaking point. What does that actually look like?
It envisions a moment where the first-past-the-post system finally buckles under the weight of multi-party fragmentation.
Like it just breaks completely.
Imagine a severe crisis hits. Perhaps Burnham is forced to call an early election, and the result is a massive hung parliament where no single party can form a stable majority.
Total gridlock.
Or imagine Reform UK and the Liberal Democrats break through with massive vote shares, but disproportionately few seats, sparking national outrage over democratic fairness.
The demand for proportional representation, a system where the percentage of seats a party gets in Parliament exactly matches the percentage of votes they want from the public, would become the single dominant issue in British politics.
It wouldn't just be about changing the CEO anymore. It would be about rewriting the corporate bylaws entirely.
Exactly. Moving to proportional representation would forever alter the Westminster system. It would legally end the era of single-party, brittle majorities and force the UK into a European-style system of permanent coalition building.
It would be the most significant constitutional change in a century.
The conclusion we have to draw from all this data is chillingly clear. Andy Burnham is about to inherit a massive parliamentary majority. He has the goodwill of his party and a fresh honeymoon period.
On paper, all the structural conditions for stability are present.
But every single prime minister since Cameron had those exact same favorable conditions on paper. Johnson had an 80-seat majority. Starmer had a 174-seat majority, and the machine chewed them all up anyway.
It demonstrates that you cannot solve deep systemic crises with superficial personnel changes.
You just can't.
A new leader can change the tone of a government, but they cannot wish away a stagnant economy, a fractured electorate, and an electoral system that amplifies anxiety.
So what does this all mean? To summarize the madness we've unpacked today, the United Kingdom is trapped in a permanent cycle of political mutiny.
A vicious loop.
It is a vicious, self-sustaining loop fueled by four massive structural forces. First, an uncodified constitution with internal party rules that allow bloodless, overnight coups without voter input.
Second, a deeply stagnant economy where real wages haven't meaningfully grown in 20 years, creating a furious, impatient electorate.
Third, the lingering internal party fractures caused by Brexit that make building a consensus impossible.
And fourth, a first-past-the-post voting system that creates massive but incredibly brittle parliamentary majorities, leaving MPs terrified of third-party challengers and desperate to hit the reset button at the first sign of trouble.
It is a perfect case study in how deep, unaddressed structural rot will always, eventually, overpower whatever fresh, optimistic face a party puts at the podium.
That's the reality they're facing.
Which leaves you, the listener, with a final, provocative thought to mull over. If political parties have fully internalized the lesson that they can simply swap out their leaders every 2 years as a low-cost reset button to avoid facing the true wrath of the voters, at what point does the British public decide that this charade is over?
How long will they tolerate it?
Think back to our corporate boardroom at the start of the show. At what point do the shareholders realize that changing the CEO every 18 months isn't actually fixing the bankrupt company? When does the public demand an entirely new corporate structure?
That's the million-dollar question.
Could the ultimate, lasting legacy of this chaotic, revolving door decade be the final death of the two-party Westminster system as the world knows it? Think about that the next time you hear a politician promise a fresh start. Until next time, keep diving deep.